Right, today in geometry, we are looking at the first part of section 8.4. 8.4 is properties of rhombuses, rectangles, and squares. Today, we're going to focus on properties of rectangles. So recall that a quadrilateral has four sides. A rectangle is a parallelogram with four right angles. So a quadrilateral is a rectangle if and only if it has four right angles. So here I have a picture of the measure of angle A equals the measure of angle B, which equals the measure of angle C, which equals the measure of angle D, which is equal to 90 degrees. So now we want to talk about all the properties of rectangles and their theorems. So if a quadrilateral is a rectangle, then it's a parallelogram. So all those properties that we talked about of a parallelogram, a rectangle also has. So the very first one, both pairs of opposite sides have to be parallel. So AB is parallel to DC, and AD parallel to BC. A rectangle will also have both pairs of opposite sides congruent, just like a parallelogram. So AB congruent to DC, as well as AD congruent to BC. Then we also know that opposite angles are congruent and consecutive interior angles are supplementary. So angle A has to be congruent to angle C. Angle B has to be congruent to angle D. The measure of angle A plus the measure of angle B equals 180. The measure of angle B plus the measure of angle C equals 180. The measure of angle C plus the measure of angle D equals 180. And the measure of angle D plus the measure of angle A equals 180. Then we also know that the diagonals bisect each other. So AX has to be congruent to CX, and BX has to be congruent to DX. So now we know that a rectangle has all of the same properties as a parallelogram, and it has four right angles. So now let's talk about some more properties that a rectangle will have. If a parallelogram is a rectangle, then its diagonals are congruent. Okay, so a parallelogram is a rectangle if and only if its diagonals are congruent. So in this first picture, we would have to know that AC is congruent to BD. In the next picture, we have where we also know that the diagonals have bisected one another, but if they're congruent, then AX has to be congruent to BX, which has to be congruent to CX, which has to be congruent to DX. So all four parts will have to be congruent to one another. Right, so now we're going to put all of that into play. So it says for any rectangle PQRS, decide whether the statement is always true, sometimes true, or never true. Okay, so using all the properties that we know about, remember a rectangle is a parallelogram, plus it has a few more of its own properties. So number one, angle P is congruent to angle Q. In a rectangle, will angle P always be congruent to angle Q? Absolutely, because remember in a rectangle, all four angles are congruent and they're always 90 degrees. So this is always true. Number two, PQ is congruent to QR in a rectangle. Well, there's nothing that states that the top and the side have to be congruent. Okay, so that's not going to be always true, but there's nothing that states that they can't. So this is going to be sometimes true. Number three, PR is congruent to QS. So PR congruent to QS. So those are our diagonals. That is always true in a rectangle. Number four, angle PQS. Angle PQS. So this little angle up here is congruent to angle RQS. This little angle over here. This is going to be sometimes true. And that's only if the diagonal bisects the angle. There's nothing that says that that diagonal has to bisect the angle, but there's nothing that says that it can't either. Number 5, PQ is congruent to SR, the top congruent to the bottom of a rectangle, always true. And number 6, PQ is perpendicular to QS. So PQ perpendicular to QS. So is the top perpendicular to my diagonal. That is never ever going to be true. So this is never true. Right. So now it says sketch a rectangle ABCD and list everything you know about it. So I'm just going to sketch my rectangle A, B, C, and D. I know that I have 4 right angles to make it a rectangle. So what do I know about it? Well, first I know it's a quadrilateral. I know that it has 4 right angles. I know that it has 4 congruent angles. I know that it's a parallelogram. Since I know it's a parallelogram, I know that it has opposite sides parallel and congruent. I know that it has opposite angles congruent. I know that the diagonals, spelled that wrong, bisect each other. Then I also know that my diagonals are congruent in a rectangle. I know that I have consecutive interior angles supplementary. And I know that my diagonal creates 2 congruent triangles. Everything I know about a rectangle. It's our last page. It tells me the diagonals of rectangle QRST intersect at P. If angle PTS is 34 degrees and QS equals 10, find the following. So I'm just going to draw a picture of this. So for number 1, here's going to be my picture. So I have PQRS. Tell me angle PTS. So here's my diagonal. Angle PTS is 34. Oh, sorry, I labeled my rectangle wrong. Sorry. It told me that the rectangle was QRST. So QRST. So angle SRT. So let's see here. This is my P. So it tells me angle PTS is 34. PTS, this is 34 degrees down here. And Q to S is 10. So that means that both of these are 5. 5 and 5. So number 1, it says find the measure of angle SRT. So SRT, I want this angle right here is what I'm looking for. Remember, since I know that these are parallel, I have alternate interior angles, so this is 34. But I know these two together are 90. So 90 minus 34 is going to get me that angle of 56 degrees. Okay. So now let's look at number 2. Find the measure of angle QPR. So I see QPR, that's going to be the top of this. So this is Q, this was P, this was R. Again, I know that this is 34, so that means that this side is also 34. So find the measure of angle QPR. I know all 3 angles have to add up to equal 180. So 180 minus 34 minus 34, that is going to equal 112 degrees. Number 3 says find QP. Well, we found QP on number 1, right? Number 1, they told me that the entire diagonal was 10. QP is part of that diagonal, and I know that they got bisected, so it's 5. Number 4 says RP. Well, again, RP is part of my diagonal. So again, part number 1, I found that. That's also 5. Number 5, find QR. So QR is what we're going to look at. I notice, okay, I'm going to draw this. This is QRT. So this is for number 5. I have this right angle here. We already found that this other angle down here was going to be 56 degrees. Right? So I know that this is 56. I know that R to T, that's a diagonal, that's a 10. We want to find a QR, so this is what I'm looking for. I can use SOHCAHTOA. So I can stand down here at this angle. I can say that the sine of 56 is equal to x over 10. So then when I cross multiply, hold on 1 second. I need to double check my angle here of 56. Okay. So angle QRT, let's see, QRT, I know, sorry, that this angle up here, QRT, is 32. I'm sorry, I wrote down the wrong angle. I know this angle is 34. Couldn't read my own handwriting there. 34. Okay, so that's the angle that we know. I stand here. That's the cosine of angle 34. Actually, it would not have mattered if I'd kept that 56 down there. Okay, so cosine of 34 is equal to x over 10. So cross multiply, 10 times the cosine of 34 is equal to x. When I type that in my calculator, I get that x is approximately 8.3. So I have QR is 8.3. So now number 6 wants RS. So again, so for number 6, I'm going to draw this triangle here. So this is Q, this is R, this is S, this is my 90. Now I know that this angle S down here, so if this was 34, that means that was 34. This is going to be 56 down here. So this is my 56 degrees down here. Again, I know that my diagonal is 10. So I can stand down here at this angle, again using SOHCAHTOA. I'm looking for RS, my cosine. So I would say the cosine of 56 is equal to x over 10. Cross multiply, x times the cosine of 56 equals x. When I type that in, x is approximately 5.6. So RS is approximately 5.6. So given rectangles, we can still use SOHCAHTOA because I have right triangles with my diagonals. Right, so as promised, the end of the notes, everything that we need to know. Parallelogram, 2 sets of opposite sides parallel, 2 sets of opposite sides congruent. Opposite angles are congruent. Consecutive angles are supplementary. The diagonals bisect each other, and diagonals form 2 congruent triangles. Notice that these properties of a parallelogram come in sets of 2. 2 about the sides, 2 about the angles, and 2 about the diagonals. Now a rectangle has all of those properties of a parallelogram, plus I have 4 right angles, and my diagonals are congruent. So it tells you, notice that you only need to add 2 additional properties to a parallelogram to describe your rectangle. And so our homework today is going to be worksheet 8.4, covering properties of parallelograms and rectangles. Tomorrow we will look at properties of rhombuses and squares added to our parallelograms and rectangles.